What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast, Week 8 edition. Season's just flying by. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder, co-host here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by my co-host and our NFL writer, Chris Rooney. Happy Wednesday, Chris. What's up, man?
Happy Wednesday to you, Brian. How did weeks? Well, you talked about week 7 for our Twitch subscribers yesterday, but I guess quickly here for our podcast listeners, how'd you do?
I did okay. A little bit of a loss, nothing crazy as to be expected with the GPP lifestyle, the high-risk lifestyle.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, did not, and I heard you talk about this a little bit as far as playing Jamal Williams and Devontae Adams together. I made a similar mistake in my. I don't even want to call it a mistake, Brian. I mean, I played DeAndre Hopkins over Devontae Adams in cash. That pretty much was the difference between basically breaking even and having a great day. I think it was pretty close in theory, but in reality, right? I mean, Adams was just crazy, and Tyler Lockett was just crazy. So sometimes it's the way this game goes, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think those guys are in similar spots, and maybe Adams projected slightly better, but definitely not 100 fantasy points better like he ended up doing.
Yeah. So
So, but we move on to week 8. We're looking ahead here, and in this podcast, we're going to just look at some of the injuries from week 7, what that means for week 8. Of course, analyze some backfields for DFS purposes in the main slate. Talk about the slate from a high level, betting market moves. We'll actually talk about some weather this week. Chris, I know you love getting those questions on your Sunday morning periscopes. Maybe this is the week to actually talk about it. And then we'll talk about our underperforming receivers, some tight ends to target this week, and of course, Chris's favorite game stacks will close out the show. So, Chris, let's jump to some injuries, and I think the best way to describe this injury segment is a guy was hurt. There's a direct beneficiary, but there might be someone else coming back that could mess this up because that's like every single player that we're about to talk about. So let's start with Cleveland. Odell Beckham unfortunately tore his ACL on that interception return. Rashard Higgins scored a touchdown and was looking good, but Kadero Hodge is off the injured reserve this week, and he was playing over Higgins the first couple weeks of the season.
yeah, we have an interesting situation here too, Brian, where the Browns look like they have updated their unofficial depth chart on the team website. And they have Higgins starting opposite of Landry on the official depth chart. So I think at least for one more week we'll see that. They have not yet added Hodge to this depth chart. Peoples Jones, DPJ, had the big catch to win the game for the Browns. He's actually listed as Landry's direct backup. So we're gonna have to monitor how they play things out here in Week 8 against the Raiders. I think it's a great week for the Browns this week.
For sure. Let's jump out to San Francisco. And Debo Samuel, unfortunately, tweaked his hamstring. He looks to be out a couple of weeks. Jeff Wilson, who at 0.0% ownership in the Millie, went off for 100 yards and 3 touchdowns before suffering a high ankle sprain. And Jermichael Hasty has looked great in the limited time he's been on the field, but it sounds like Tevin Coleman might come back this week as he was activated off the injured reserve.
Yes, and it's funny that I just talked about the Browns depth chart. I mean, some of these depth charts are absolutely just not even, I think, worth paying attention to. 49ers still have Dante Pettis listed as Debo's direct backup, and I think based off of the usage we've seen so far this season, Brian, I think we can safely assume that that's just fake news, right? I don't think Dante Pettis is going to get much run here. For the last few weeks, both Ayuk and Samuel have been running a ton of routes together, clearly ahead of every other receiver except for Kendrick Bourne, who does play a little bit of a dynamic role for them. For whatever reason, Kyle Shanahan loves the dude. I do think that Brandon Ayuk is probably going to be one of the most popular receivers this week, playing in a high total game against a really poor Seattle pass defense that we see involved in these great game stack environments every week, right? So want to pay close attention to Ayuk this week, I think.
Absolutely. And let's talk about Philadelphia as they'll have a matchup against another terrible defense, the Cowboys. Now, this is on the Sunday night showdown slate, but still something to keep in mind here as Deshaun Jackson came back immediately injured once again. And Travis Fulgham's locked into his role, at least according to all beat reporters, all coaching staff, he's locked in. And so Djax's direct backup, who he took over for, was John Hightower, who tops our underperforming receiver list this week, which is no surprise if you've ever watched any Eagles games and how many deep shots he gets. But this can be complicated because rookie Jalen Rager activated off IR. seems like he's practicing and could return this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit this perfect. I think if Rager is active, we probably are going to want him, and we're probably going to have to downgrade Hightower, even though he's pretty highly prioritized on our underperforming list this week. That's not going to materialize if Rager plays, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about Seattle. The final note for week 8. Chris Carson, mid-foot sprain, a little ominous. We don't know exactly how bad it is. Carlos Hyde, Travis Homer also sustained injuries in their week 7 game against the Cardinals. It sounds like to me, Chris, Hyde and Homer's injuries aren't that bad, but who the hell knows? Maybe we get a full run of DJ Dallas.
Yeah, but no matter what happens here with these running backs, I mean, it really has been the let Russ cook movement, right? So this might not be as attractive of a spot as we'd be hoping if there was some role change due to injury here. One thing that I am paying attention to, Brian, is both Homer and Dallas are min price on DraftKings. So if they are down both Carson and Hyde, we're probably going to look at this a lot closer.
That's definitely true. And speaking of their Week 7 opponent, the Cardinals, they're not on the slate this week. But Kenyon Drake, high ankle sprain, he's out a couple weeks. So just keep in mind for Week 9, we'll see how pricing gets when we get there. But it will be the Chase Edmonds show, which I think Chris is probably long overdue.
Oh, absolutely. I think we're all excited to see what he can do, and we'll talk more about that next week.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some more backfield situations that have an impact on the Week 8 main slate. And the Chiefs in a big spot against the Jets, as we'll talk about when we hit the betting market totals and spreads. But yeah, Chiefs expected to have a billion points this week, and it'll be important to figure out how the Edwards-Helaire and Le'Veon Bell situation shakes out because Bell did get 33% of the snaps in Week 6.
And we've got a revenge game here from Bell, right? No,
Mm-hmm.
CEH, I think, is still the guy here. Played 53% of the snaps last week. The game was kind of a blowout against Denver. A couple of weird situations there, right? We had a defensive touchdown and then a kick return touchdown. So Kansas City wasn't really put in any position where they had to push it on offense throughout this game. So I think that might be why the second unit in general got more run. I mean, Chad Henne even finished the game out at quarterback for them. So the fact that Le'Veon Bell played so much, I don't know what to make of that because of all those factors.
Yeah, it's definitely tough to tell. I know he had 6 touches in the game, or 6 opportunities. 3 came in the first quarter, 3 came in the third quarter, and then it was mostly DeAndre Washington mop up time in the fourth quarter. But we'll see. I feel like, especially DFS, big tournaments, people try to get cute, and I feel like we'll see a decent amount of people play Bell this week when, again, as Chris, you and I know, the key is just getting volume into your lineups. And Bell has no guarantee for it, and while he may be a couple percent owned, there's no need to risk your running back spots on uncertain volume.
And I think we're going to be able to find the volume at that kind of mid-range or below price tier this week anyway. So we do have obviously the Baltimore Ravens returning this week, Brian. And for those who may have forgotten about week 6 already, which is certainly easy to do when we're so forward looking in this DFS kind of bubble that we're in, Mark Ingram has a high ankle sprain that he is nursing from that last game Baltimore had. And I guess he did not practice as of Wednesday here, which is when we're recording the show. So what do you think is going to shake out with the Ravens here against the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely not a great sign coming off a bye week and not practicing on Wednesday. We'll see a lot of veterans have limited or Wednesdays off completely, but not coming off a bye week and not when dealing with a high ankle sprain. So to me, it reads like we won't see Ingram this week. Maybe we will. Maybe he gets in a couple limited practices and he suits up. But either way, if he's out, I think a lot of people, you and I were talking before the show, are going to want to play J.K. Dobbins when in fact Gus Edwards is going to get a lot more work than anyone would hope for.
Yeah, so I think, we'll need to keep an eye on this Thursday, Friday, see if Ingram is actually ruled out, and then just try to make the best decision that we can come Friday. And we'll try and give you the best information in our daily plug. Brian, Leonard Fournette actually returned for the Buccaneers in their game against the Raiders, which was moved all around the schedule because of some COVID-19 concerns. But Fournette actually slotted right back into the top role in this backfield. He had 7 targets against the Raiders. Is Rojo canceled again? Like, what are we making of this?
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of it came down to just the way the game played out because after the game, we found out that Leonard Fournette has overtaken LaShawn McCoy as their satellite back. If you're used to Tom Brady's offense, that's James White up in New England. That's Leonard Fournette's role. I'm not sure we'd ever equate Leonard Fournette to James White, but that's the role he's playing. 2-minute drills, passing downs, hurry up. And as a result, we saw 7 targets. Now, maybe if we see them control the clock a little bit more and have a run-heavy approach, maybe we get more Rojo. This all seems ass backwards to me, but that's the way it's playing out in Tampa.
Yeah, and especially on a PPR site like DraftKings, we love the targets for running backs, and we know Fournette can still run between the tackles as well. So if that's what his role is going to be, I think you'd probably agree with me that Fournette is a better fantasy running back than James White, even though that might be more of the role he's playing here. I'm a little more interested in him than Jones at this point, if that truly is how he's going to be used the rest of the way here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen we whether it's quotes or clips or coaches talking, Rojo's had some mistakes in the passing games, drops, missed assignments, and if Fournette's going to jump right in and be that guy, then he has way more upside on both sides. So something we'll keep in mind. But yeah, Fournette, I agree with you, Chris, is certainly the guy we're looking to play in DFS. All right, let's move on to the Week 8 betting market. As always, we'd like to look at these teams from a top level before we narrow it down to the player level. And let's talk about the biggest main slate spreads. And my God, the Chiefs are 19.5-point favorites versus the Jets. I'm not sure if that number could get high enough where I'd want to bet the Jets, just for the record. And then we drop all the way down, and the next closest favorites are Green Bay, 6.5 points over the Vikings, and then Titans, 6-point favorites over the Bengals. And that's really it. A lot of close games otherwise.
Yeah, and obviously with Bell returning, I mean, under normal circumstances, we'd be saying, okay, we're all over Clyde Edwards-Helaire here, but it definitely makes it difficult to be confident that he's going to continue to see true 3-down RB1 usage. Last week's sample really tough to evaluate, but I don't know, Brian. I mean, even if we can get 15 to 20 touches out of CEH, which is perfectly reasonable, even with Bell in the picture, maybe we do want some exposure here. I mean, we preach playing large favorite running backs. The only thing working against him here is the fact that Bell is back, and it's a revenge game for Bell. Like we said earlier, people are going to probably play that more than they should. Maybe, Brian, what we do is we actually go to the next biggest favorite. You mentioned Green Bay, and we actually target Jamal Williams, whose price is, I think, pretty similar to CEH this week. But we absolutely know for certain if he is actually going to be the starter again, that he's going to get the vast majority of the touches there. And I think that that's probably a little bit of a better spot than trying to guess with the Chiefs right now.
Yeah, I love that idea. And again, as we mentioned it earlier, it's all about volume at running back. And when it comes down to it, you can't play every running back, right? Ideally, we'd love to play CEH and other fringe guys who are in good spots and may get more touches. And we actually had a comment on our Tuesday night Twitch stream about, I'm surprised you didn't play more Antonio Gibson, being directed to me. And I was like, yeah, obviously Gibson in a good matchup against Dallas in Week 7 is a great spot. But when I can guarantee 15 plus touches for Jamal Williams, I can guarantee 15 plus touches for Gio Bernard, including those in the passing game. I can't guarantee those for Antonio Gibson. For me, it's all about volume. And obviously, each situation is different, Chris, but we don't have to make NFL DFS as hard as some people make it. There's a lot of easy rules you can follow, and getting volume at running back is one of them. Now, even if Jamal Williams is priced up like he is, he's still in a good spot. And I think AJ Dillon saw 5 touches last week, so we're getting a workhorse running back at still lower cost than he should be.
Yep, 5 carries for Dillon, no targets. So Jamal, the more dynamic player right now, anyway. Now we can't move on from this without talking about King Henry. And I know that this is a very tense subject, I guess, across the industry because a lot of people, for whatever reason, do not like using Derrick Henry, certainly in low risk lineups when they can avoid it. But as almost a full touchdown favorite against the Bengals, who's their defense has not been great so far this year. It's really hard. The only case to make against Derrick Henry, in my opinion, this week, Brian, is that there's just better running backs to play. I don't think on his own, Derrick Henry is a bad play this week.
Right, I agree. I know some other guys you're looking at this week: Kareem Hunt, Alvin Kamara, the Gaskin, Miles Gaskin,
Mm-hmm.
all guys in good spots, whether it's because of price or matchup or volume. But I mean, we have a pretty clear player pool, I think, and it's pretty condensed. So, and honestly, cash games, tournaments, whatever you play this week, it looks like we have a lot of clear, good plays at running back.
Absolutely. And that gives us a nice core to build around, and that allows us to do some creative things with our game stacks, play some underperforming wide receivers, and we'll get to that in a second. But first, we just talked about the biggest favorites on the slate. We should probably spend a little bit of time talking about the best game environments in general. And sticking with the Jamal Williams topic from a few seconds ago, we have Minnesota and Green Bay with a 54.5-point total. Now, this is just one of the games that actually has wind. This is the first slate of the year. You touted weather off the top of the show here, Brian, where wind actually is probably going to matter. We see a forecast of winds over 20 miles per hour, I think, for that game, which is not great for passing. Better for Jamal Williams, but not great for passing. We have Tennessee and Cincinnati with the same 54.5-point total. Right behind them, we have San Francisco and Seattle, 54 points, and Las Vegas and Cleveland with 53.5 points. Now, I just kind of gave you the reason why I think Minnesota and Green Bay might not be as attractive as we were initially thinking at the beginning of this week. But I guess I want to hear you explain to me, Brian, if you're actually afraid of that game now.
Yeah, and when I looked at our model this morning, I said, is something wrong? Do I have to go back in and look at the behind the scenes just because so many games were featuring crazy win totals? And I was like, what is going on? Went back and checked, double checked our weather feed because it really was that serious. I think it was 8 or 9 games forecasted for winds of 15 miles per hour or more this week, and a couple more of 10 miles per hour or more, which is insane. That 15-mile-per-hour mark you've referenced on the podcast before, you've referenced on the Periscopes. That's the number when fantasy scoring starts to dip. And when we see it at 20 miles per hour or more, that's when we really should start to be concerned. And anytime we get weather questions throughout the week, normally Sunday mornings when people start realizing that it might be a thing, the answer we always give is the betting markets are going to tell us if it's an issue or not. Right? If we see totals start plummeting and dropping, then we can start to be a little concerned. And Chris, we've already kind of seen that early in the week. Green Bay, Minnesota, 2.5-point drop. Chicago and New Orleans, 2.5-point drop. Buffalo and New England, 2.5-point drop in their total. All three of these games forecasted winds of 20 miles per hour or more. This could change, but as of now, Wednesday, it looks like we might have some weather issues on Sunday.
Yeah, and just missing the cut here on this, it's really sitting right at that 15 mile per hour number, is that outrageously high 34-point team total for the Kansas City Chiefs against the New York Jets, which means even though Patrick Mahomes does, despite his price, project to be one of the most popular quarterbacks on this slate, probably will be somebody that people, at least initially, will look to use in their low-risk lineups. That might not actually be the move here if they're more inclined to run based off of the game environment. So we're going to have to keep a look at that all week, really. Now, behind them, we have the Packers, the Tennessee Titans, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Cleveland Browns with the next highest team totals. Any of these teams stand out to you as places to go? Now, as we're talking through this, Brian, I can tell you that I'm starting to get drawn a little bit more towards, Tennessee and Seattle, just because we actually aren't seeing the same number of wind concerns with those quarterbacks right now.
Yeah, again, and I think weather is generally over analyzed,
Yeah.
and most people are overly concerned about weather. But then I think when there's situations like this, when they should be concerned, they don't rate it appropriately. And I think this could be a week where we take advantage of that, and we're going to continue to monitor the betting markets. But I see no issue with playing the higher total games that have less wind concerns. Could really provide an edge for us in all contest types.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we look to do that this week, I mean, we want to maybe, because wind is wind has the most impact on the passing games. What I'm trying to say, I can't talk today. So when we look at our underperforming wide receivers, Brian, I mean, which ones on this list here that you have for us? Like we have Darnell Mooney. We love Darnell Mooney with the Chicago Bears this year. We've been chasing those points for the last couple of weeks on showdown slates, but Chicago looking like one of those teams, Brian, that we might want to downgrade a little bit in our personal rankings.
How's this for a Galaxy Brain meme? Hear me out here. What if the wind helps Nick Foles' deep passing
Oh,
accuracy because
wow.
it's been so poor, he can't get it anywhere near Mooney's zip code. But if the wind could push it towards Mooney's area, general direction, maybe he can finally realize his expected opportunity. How's that sound?
I'm going to co-sign on this take. All in on Darnell Mooney. No, I mean, when we have underperforming receivers, I don't want anybody listening to misunderstand. These teams still have to go out. They still have to play these games. They're still going to try to do what they do well out on the field. It's just the wind reduces the probability that they're going to be as successful as they want to be, right? So, I do think that means that we should be looking more at a guy like Hollywood Brown, Brian, once again on the underperforming list, which seems kind of crazy because I think he's having a pretty decent fantasy season. Again, these numbers just suggest it hasn't been as good as it should be, right?
Right. I mean, he has the highest expected fantasy points over the last 3 weeks of anybody on this list by a wide margin, like 15 or 16 more points than anyone else on this list this week. But the fact that he's still underperformed goes to show that he hasn't had the blow up game that he should have, which means we should continue playing him until he does have that. And if you look at other guys on this list, AJ Green is back making an appearance, and he, along with T.Y. Hilton, composed the old washed receivers club on the underperforming receivers list. But Chris, I will say AJ Green, right, still leads or is top of the league in air yards, top of the league in end zone targets. And while it's vomit inducing to play him, he's still getting targets, and he's, at least lately, he's not looked like complete dust, and he's actually putting in some decent box score totals.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen each of Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins play extremely well over the last few weeks. So the fact that Green has actually seen his target share sort of remain pretty stable and intriguing for fantasy over the last couple weeks, flying under the radar, and his price is now the lowest of the three. So when you put all that together, he's actually a really strong tournament play, I think.
Absolutely. And so some other guys, and again, this full list with some analysis will be in the daily plug on Friday, but other guys that top the list of our underperforming receivers in week 8. John Hightower, we already mentioned his situation. That's on the Sunday night showdown slate. Jeff Smith, who can't catch a pass to save his life, but Brashad Perriman is likely out this week with the concussion. That would open up more opportunities for Jeff Smith. Tim Patrick, you were on the train last week. He sustained an injury. There was weather issues. If he can play this week, he's an underperforming receiver. And then CeeDee Lamb, who may be with Dallas's quarterback 3, but he is on the list.
Yes, he is. That's really all we want to say about Lamb this week, right? He's a great player, but it's looking like tough sledding for Dallas, and they're gauging in some trades to sort of punt on the 2020 season, which is probably smart. Now, to make our rest of our lineups work, we do need to fit in some tight ends this week, and we like looking at who's playing the most at tight end, who's seeing a ton of targets based off of the number of routes they're running, and all that fun stuff, right? So this week, we actually have an opportunity where we have a slate that really has all the best tight ends available for us to play. And so I think that's probably where ownership is going to concentrate. But I do think we can go right back to the well we were at 2 weeks ago, Brian, with Trey Burton.
Yes.
Looks like Mo Alley Cox is not practicing as of Wednesday this week, which means he should still see a ton of work. Targeted on over 27% of his routes run in the 3 games he's played, which is well above the league average of 20% at the position. And he's just 3,500 on DraftKings this week compared to paying a premium for guys like Kittle, Kelsey, Waller. They're all great plays, those 3. But I mean, when we can find the cap savings, I think we're going to need it this week, because if you've taken a peek at the pricing this week, it's going to be pretty hard to get to Alvin Kamara, Devontae Adams, and I think we want to get at least one of those guys in our lineups this week.
Yeah, it's not like last week where we had the easy values with Jamal and Gio that could help pay up. I will say with Kittle and Kelsey, Kittle obviously had the matchup with Bill Belichick last week. Kelsey in the snowy, windy conditions. So maybe people will overlook them a bit this week, especially as pricing dictates we should go cheaper at the position. But I agree with you. I mean, Burton, I don't know what DraftKings and FanDuel were doing. They just forgot he existed for a week and kept his price roughly the same, despite his heavy involvement in the Colts offense. So he looks like the easy value play of the week. Any other guys we want to talk about before we close out the show with some game stacks?
Absolutely. I mentioned him in passing here a second ago, but I do really like Darren Waller this week. You can get him at a pretty decent discount from both Kelsey and Kittle's price, and he's playing Cleveland. He's clearly Derek Carr's favorite target. Cleveland's defense has been involved in some high-scoring games, so I feel like Waller will get his. Could be worth a flyer. And then going to the Browns, we saw Harrison Bryant have an amazing game for them in Week 7. Didn't play, a full complement of the snaps by any stretch of the imagination, but don't let the touchdowns fool you. He actually is playing ahead of David Njoku. This wasn't fluky. He ran more routes than Njoku. He was targeted on a higher percentage of his routes than Njoku. The Browns have floated this idea, Brian, that they've wanted to get rid of Njoku for like well over a year now,
Yeah.
and now they're playing him behind their I think 4th-round draft pick from this past spring. So I think Bryant is going to be legit the rest of the way, especially now that they're a man down in that passing game.
Absolutely. I know he was near the top of leaderboards for a lot of GPP winning lineups last week. Again, he was super cheap, and maybe that's the type of guy you want to take a flyer on, uncertain playing time, especially at a position that has tons of volatility. So, yeah, something to keep in mind as we continue to monitor Austin Hooper, who should be returning soon from an appendectomy. So, all right, let's talk about game stacks. Chris, you've been crushing them this year. And so we have obviously the Minnesota Green Bay game, issues with the wind potentially. Then we have Tennessee and Cincinnati, San Francisco and Seattle as the games you're looking at. Talk to me about these 3 games and maybe any other backup options if the wind gets crazy at some of these higher total games.
Yeah, I'm most concerned about the wind for a stack, in that Green Bay Minnesota game. The game that I think is probably the safest here is San Francisco and Seattle. And we were talking a little bit before we started recording here about Jimmy Garoppolo. I know Jimmy Garoppolo is not a quarterback that people are excited to play really in any fantasy format, but he has been extremely efficient as far as fantasy production goes. I think a lot of that has to do with the creative ways that they quote unquote pass the football with him. They do a lot of those touch passes on sweeps to Debo and Ayuk, and it'll obviously be mostly Ayuk now with Debo out. So Seattle again, very poor pass defense, actually 30th by advanced statistics DVOA defending the passing game so far this season. So I do think Jimmy is going to have plenty of success with the usual suspects, Ayuk, George Kittle. Now, the running back situation there in San Francisco is just absolutely disgusting to try and suss out and guess. But we might not need to even worry about that this week with some of the other backs that are in good spots. On the other side of that game, I don't think at this point we have to tell anybody that either Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf are amazing DFS plays. In a lot of respects, I think people are going to look to Lockett here just because he does run more dynamic routes for them. He plays well in the slot. That does look on paper to be a little bit of a better matchup this week. But I mean, DK Metcalf is just, the definition of matchup proof at that position. And he did not really have a big game on Sunday Night Football. So I do think DK is probably a really strong tournament play this week.
NBA playoff zigzag theory. You just alternate back and forth each week. So last week was
Yep.
Lockett week. Naturally means this week must be DK Metcalf week. I'm looking through a couple of your notes here, Tennessee and Cincinnati. We don't have to go through too much here because all this is going to be in the daily plug on Friday. But I do want to mention the importance of looking at pressure generated on opposing quarterbacks. I noticed you have a note here about Joe Burrow facing low projected opposing pressure from the Tennessee Titans. And if we can find matchups where the defense can't generate a ton of pressure, I mean, we see this in any advanced analysis that quarterbacks, sounds crazy, I know, novel idea, that they perform better when there's not pressure versus when there is. And if we can accurately project pressure, then we can figure out which quarterbacks are more likely to have ceiling games. And Chris, maybe that's Joe Burrow this week.
And not only Burrow, Tannehill as well. Actually, Burrow projects for the second lowest pressure, to be generated against him this week. Tannehill's the lowest. So
Wow.
on both sides of this game, it actually looks like, we have 2 quarterbacks that should be able to go back and forth all afternoon on Sunday, 54.5 point total. The wind is right on that threshold, Brian. We're projecting about 14 miles per hour right now. So we need to check in on that come Sunday morning. But right now, I am really liking this game. We know A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry are going to be high ceiling plays pretty much every week the way that they're being used right now by the Tennessee Titans. And Burrow has been playing very well in spots this year. This looks like another one where it could happen.
Absolutely. And before we get out of here, I do want to ask you, put you on the spot here. If we can't get this Minnesota Green Bay game in our lives because of the wind, do you have any backup options in your pocket that we could potentially use?
I do. You are catching me live on the air here, sort of trying to figure out where I would go to next. How about a divisional tilt? How about Ben Roethlisberger and Lamar Jackson going head to head? You've got Lamar Jackson with Mark Andrews underperforming Hollywood Brown on one side. We have Ben Roethlisberger with Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, who had a ton of air yards last week, James Conner, who's a lock for virtually all of the work in the backfield, except for apparently a goal line carry from Benny Snell last week. No, I do think that game has some potential, and we'll probably want to look a little bit more closely at that. It projects for some wind that's below the line that we're concerned about. So that might be where we go if Green Bay is not usable.
To find out Chris's final decisions on game stacks, be sure to tune into OccupyFantasy.com. The daily plug on Friday is when it'll be released for the main slate. You can get our full underperforming receiver list there, all of our top plays from the Occupy model, and of course the lineup strategies to employ in any contest type that you play. So that'll do it for Chris. I'm Brian. We appreciate you all listening. A final reminder to go ahead and subscribe, whether you're watching the video form on YouTube or you're listening in your favorite podcast app. Just click that subscribe button. That way you get access to all of our new podcasts as soon as they're released every week. All right, Chris, Brian, Occupy Fantasy. Good luck this week, and we'll talk to you soon.